Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Nick Craig, president of the Core Leadership Institute and author of the book, Leading from Purpose, Clarity and the Confidence to Act when it matters most. Nick, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very good, Chris. It's great to be here with you.
Fantastic. I'm glad we made it happen. Before we jump in, Nick, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
I've been on this journey for a long time. I, at this point, have lost most of my hair trying to figure this stuff out. I also have two girls who are 20 and 23 who continue to test me and remind me that I can step more fully into my purpose every day, which has been a really interesting part of the journey as well. The question of how we got here, I don't think teaching programs about purpose and authenticity was ever something that I as a kid said that's what I should be doing. And when I grew up, it was during a space race and everybody wanted to be an astronaut. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. At the same time, I think that the opportunity for people to really discover what is the reason they're here and what's the gift they're meant to bring and how do they lead from it is something that I can help them with. And I'm looking forward to just talking with you about how that journey has unfolded.
Well, obviously you do a lot of work around leadership, authenticity, purpose. I think for everyone listening, and I would love to know your thoughts, how would you define purpose for the audience?
Purpose has been around for a long time. And for me, when I've looked at all the people we've been working with over the last 10 years, the wording that comes out that is the most visceral and real for me as to what actually happens in the room when it shows up is purpose is the unique gift that you bring to the world. One way to think about it is if I replaced you or anyone listening with someone equally as capable as you are in your life, the question 3 months later, if I interviewed everybody, would be is what do you most miss? And the answer to that question would probably be your purpose.
And how do other people define purpose then?
There are so many different definitions of purpose that's out there. I mean, for some people, it's do what you love, have people pay you a lot of money, and become really successful, and that's what purpose is about. And I'm like, well, gosh, if that's the case, you don't need any purpose.
I asked that because my purpose got dramatically changed when my first baby came recently. Because before that, it was just my entire purpose, was around maybe selfishly around Chris, around me, around my own goals, my own aspirations to achieve financial freedom and create an incredible, life for myself and my wife. But then as soon as the baby came, it dramatically shifted away from Chris to family and creating and that foundation for my family. And when I wake up in the morning now, when I come to work, it's no longer about me. It's about, I think about whenever I'm having a bad day or I'm stressed out or why am I doing this? I just look at that photo on my phone or on my computer of my family and that's the purpose of me. And all of the energy that I need is there. It's right in front of me.
Yeah, so what's wonderful about that is that I actually think that is not exactly, there's a deeper level of purpose that I like people to be able to even go to, even more so than that. What you just described in some sense is how, from my perspective, you have expressed your purpose. Now that you have this beautiful baby, that's a beautiful way for how you express it. But if I look at how you have put together these programs and the journey that you've been on, there's a unique way in which you're doing this that if someone else was doing it, it wouldn't look like this. There's a lot of people that run podcasts, but nobody does it the way you do it. And there's opportunities people give you, not because you have the skills, because the gift you bring won't show up if you're not the person that does it. And I think that one of the beautiful things about, is it your daughter, yes?
Yeah, Robin, yeah.
Robin, is that when you hold her, in my experiences when I had my first daughter, there's this uniqueness that you experience as the father of this connection. And it's different than any other connection you'll have in your life. And I think that each of us, the challenge for most of us is that we go through the world having everyone tell us who we should be, how we should be, what our role is, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Here's the 360, here's the assessment. Oh no, you're a Myers-Briggs this, or whatever the case may be. But those all put us into a category of being like everybody else. And the truth is that there is no one of us that based on the journey that we've been, is anyone but the unique self that we are. But the challenge is if you don't really know what it is, then you can't lead from it. If you can't lead from it, then you're leading from somebody else's script. And I don't know about you, but there's no script out there these days that's existed that's working very well anymore. So we need leaders who can step into that part of themselves and see through their own unique set of glasses. And from that place, say, here's where we go next. Especially when we live in a world in which uncertainty seems to be the daily breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, listen, I don't know about you, but everybody listening, if I think about what I would open the newspaper and read 10 years ago versus what I read every day today, and whether it's the Yellow Jackets or Brexit or Cohen's testimony yesterday in the U.S. or whatever the case might be. I mean, every day I open the newspaper, I'm like, I never thought I'd see something as crazy as this. So in some senses, that what I discovered when I was doing all the research is that everybody wants purpose to make you happy, clarify what you should and what you shouldn't do. There's a lot of things people say it should be. What it really does underneath everything else is it's the ultimate antidote against uncertainty, because it eats it. Because in some sense, everything, your job, your title, all of these things somebody gave to you, somebody can take them away. One thing that no one can ever take away from you is your purpose and the gift that you bring. Now, you express it differently as a dad than you might be when we're having this conversation. But at its core, it's the same you. My challenge is how do I help people lead from that place? Here's the thing. I think that everybody needs to answer these questions. But what I'm trying to do with this work is give people, for the first time, the solid ground that won't move. My purpose is to wake you up and have you finally be home. Okay. Now, what does that really mean? Is that if I look through my life, I have been about waking up others to the possibility of who they are. When I was about 14 or 15 years old, I was living in my parents were having a terrible time. We were living in a basement apartment overlooking a swamp in Charleston, South Carolina. And I remember I was miserable. We had just moved there. And I kept going to this bookstore and I kept looking at these books. It was before there was any self-help books or anything. And I kept looking at this book about Gandhi and about monks and about Lincoln. And I sort of looked at all these different books and I realized that every one of these really amazing people had an incredibly challenging life. But they transformed it into the possibility of what it meant to be a human being. And I remember at that moment sort of having this insight that that was where I was going to spend my life. Okay. Now, I forgot about that until I sort of worked on this work when I was in my 40s and then went back and realized that that's sort of when this thing started. But it'd always been there. And if I look through my whole career and everything I've done, it has always been about that. And so to know it means that I've been able to be at peace with that's what I do. Okay. And there's a lot of other things that other people have wanted me to do that I could do, but I do them. And at the end of the day, I go, okay, I could do that, but why isn't that satisfying? It should be, but it isn't. And when I look at the leaders that I've worked with, most of them have gotten to the top of whatever they do because of their skill. And now they've been raised to this role of being the leader or the general manager, but who are they?
So relatable, by the way, to me. I was so miserable as a leader. I never thought I had everything I dreamed of, coming from nothing to having a high paying salary, to being a director, to all of the things that I wished for, but I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable and no one could understand it around me. My friends, my family, my wife, like, why are you not happy? And I was like, because I think you're right. I got there because of the skills I possessed, but why am I even here?
I've found that there's 3 powerful access points. So one is to go back and think about what are the most magical moments in your childhood. As I say that, I know for some of us, our childhood was not exactly magical.
I couldn't think of any, by the way, if I'm being honest. I had.
Well, okay. But at the same time, even the people with the most traumatic childhood experiences, there's moments, whether it was when they were a teenager or whatever it is, where things, for a moment in time, things felt special or different. There was sitting on the football field and where they happened to be, or whatever the case may be, that there's usually something that when they tap into it, it accesses that curious little kid inside us. So I had a guy, very serious guy. He was a treasurer for a big international bank. And I asked him, well, what do treasurers do? He says, well, in a bank, we are actually responsible for all the securities that determine what we can do for how much we can loan. I'm like, oh, this is a pretty serious job, right? So I'm sitting here saying, I wonder what his purpose is. And so we start looking back. And when I said, look, do you have any magical moments from your childhood? He said, I had a really tough childhood. My parents got divorced early and so forth. But I do remember when I was a teenager that I went camping, and we were camping in a place where there had been a couple of battles, both in the First and Second World War. And I decided to start digging a hole, and I was going to find something. And he's like 2 feet down. He just continues digging, and he hits something. And it turns out it was a medal, as in like a military medal. He said, my purpose is to always dig, find the medal.
Oh, wow.
And I go, and the rest of us just get chills up our spines because we go, oh my gosh, what a most perfect role to be the treasurer of a bank, because if you can't dig and find the medal, you got the wrong job. So he calls his wife and says to her what his purpose is, and she sort of gasps because she gets it, and then she says, do you still have it? And so he tells her where it is, and she goes and gets it and opens this little wooden box, and there's the medal. Every one of us deserves that level of clarity about what our gift is. The words are a metaphor. And, when I do this work, I say, look, these words help us access this beautiful place that is our purpose, which is much more deep and rich than just the words are. But that particular set of words just really works for him, okay? One of the clients I work with is Lego these days. What's interesting is how many people around the world, when their magical moment is a Lego set, they have to go on eBay to buy the one that they had as a kid, their pirate.
Mine was the Millennium Falcon.
Well, there you go.
I actually remember very clearly.
Here's the thing. So notice the giggle that I got now from you is the curious kid inside of you that's always there.
Yeah.
This is purpose. This is what purpose looks like. Right now, purpose showed up in the room as we were talking.
Mm-hmm.
Got you in your purpose. For me, if the serious kid is saying purpose, I go, that's not purpose. I don't know what that is. But when the curious kid inside of us goes, oh my God, I just talked to a guy, president of Hershey's in the United States, and his purpose is to be the Buzz Lightyear that saves the day. Turns out he looks just like Buzz Lightyear. And when he said it originally about 8 years ago, everybody in the room literally fell out of their chair, including him. But what it does, but when he's got that energy.
Mm.
So in some sense, I think for all of us, if you turn purpose into a serious exercise, I don't know what it is, it's not purpose. It is a joyful journey of returning you back to the curious kid inside of us that is always there for us. That's the place we want people to lead from. I mean, if I look at you and I look at the t-shirt you got on, you've got this wonderful, nobody can see it, he's got this wonderful Star Wars t-shirt on, he's got a bunch of stuff. And for me, I love this because it's like the little kid in you're wearing the kid part.
And the background behind me. It's probably
exactly. Well, you got some wonderful stuff. And so nobody wants to follow are the ones who've left the curious kid in the trunk of the car. Who people want to follow in times of uncertainty, okay, are people that can connect them to that part of themselves. Another access point is through our most challenging life experiences. Here's the thing. If I look at the most challenging life experiences, it's how we get ourselves out of that hell that usually is a very good example of our purpose. From the UK, who was a country manager. She was like a very powerful lady. She was in a very difficult job. They'd given her the job that everyone else had failed at. And she told us these stories that were like 4 or 5 in a row, the most horrible things that had ever happened to anybody. And she was smiling as she was saying, and we were like, what is going on? And I was like, that's what purpose does. And so, one of her stories was of discovering that she was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, not knowing what pregnancy was at the age of 15. And she just had to get married to this famous footballer. And 8 years later, he's now an alcoholic. She's pregnant with their third, and he's doing all the bad things that someone with alcohol does. And she decides to basically get the kids and leave the house with nothing. And she ends up in front of a drugstore with a little bag, and that's all they had. She went and she had the third child, and then they end up in this little house or little apartment, everything given to them, and the kids are lying on the floor, and she is the happiest she's ever been in her life. Her purpose is, with tenacity, create brilliance. And she is the tenacious. She closed a large store in 2008 in Hong Kong, was the last one to leave, and did stuff that nobody else was willing to do. And all those stories, you can see that there's this magic that shows up in her where everybody else will run away and fall apart. She shows up and goes, yes, let's do it. Now that's who you want to turn around a business. The other place that we find our purpose is through some passions that we have. And whether it's skiing or hockey or singing or dancing or whatever the case may be, it's usually not something that we're really good at, but it's something that when we do it, it just brings us this deep sense of joy. And I had a guy who, a Dutch guy, grew up playing football and basically was on a town team, and he decided not to take all these promotions so he could stay on the town team. And they actually won nationals twice in a row. Basically, his purpose is to always play Champion League. And okay, now that metaphor for him has to do with how he leads and who he is and how he operates. Now, I'm telling this to you, I'm telling this to everybody to say, in some ways, the best way to discover your purpose is to start telling those stories, the passions, the challenging stories, the magical moments. And if you start to tell all those stories, and then you start to say, well, what's the common thread across those? You will be in that place of purpose.
It's interesting you say that, because when I reflect on my career, I had a similar background to the woman you described. Okay. Single parent, 4 kids, alcoholic dad that sort of, was very violent to my mom. We had to leave, and my mom just left with us, just took the kids away, and we lived in a sort of a hostel for a few years, just a room for a few years with nothing. And my mum went for her own mental health issues because of that traumatic experience. And we had a very traumatic childhood. And when I find when it comes to those difficult moments in business or in sports or everything, where everyone found it very stressful and very difficult, for me, it was like, you haven't seen stressful. You haven't seen terrible or bad. So what for example, I started with 20 people when I got hired, and only 2 people stayed. Sales turnover is pretty high. It was a boiler room type of environment, and whilst everyone else was crumbling under the pressure of getting a no on the phone, I was like, this is nothing. It's like, right. Have you seen what I've seen as a kid and what I've seen my mum have to go through, and my family? It's like, this is fine. It's like, I'm good with this. And similar now with some of my employees. I've hired a lot of people from those similar backgrounds because I know they're very resilient and
exactly.
They go through it. And one of my most successful employees of all time, Omri, who's now a good friend of mine and business partner as well, he came from the Israeli Armed Forces. He was a medic on the battlefield, healing wounds with people, arms being blown off. So when he came into sales, he was literally, again, there was never a stressful day for him. Whilst everyone else was panicking, there was chaos, there was business units shutting down, there was, all these terrible things. And we would sit there together sometimes and just almost laugh, not laugh in a bad way, but just laugh at the situation and kind of be able to look at it more objectively than other people, whilst everyone else is panicking, because we kind of had been through traumatic experiences, and we're like, well, but I didn't realize that at the time, but now looking back, I can see how that really impacted my career. And even now as a leader of this organization, where I'm not afraid to make mistakes, I'm not afraid to challenge myself and fail as well. So just something that I just took away from what you just said and that experience.
And so I think for you and for everybody who's listening, the truth is that we each have these stories inside of us. Now, the challenge is, since we never talk about them or we go revisit them, we forget it, and then we become a shadow of the purpose that we really are. And the power of telling that story, the power of you and I sharing the stories, is that you have to step into that part of yourself that has that resilience. And the more you step into it and the more you realize you've been through it, then the more you start to see what is the common pattern about what is it that I do that's different, and then how do I help step more fully into it? Because for me, for everybody listening, look, you are living your purpose many times every week, every month. We all do. But then there's a lot of other times when we're not. And the only thing that I'm really trying to help people is to know when you are, know when you're not, so you actually have the opportunity to choose to step back into it. Because I spent half my time going, okay, I'm being about as unpurposeful as I could possibly be, but boy, I know it. And then I have to go, okay, come on, let's like get myself to the other side. And so in some ways, the gift of purpose and the challenge of purpose is it will always say a little bit more to the left. Come on, come on, come on. No, that used to be good, but come on, let's really like open this thing up. Purpose will grow you. There's this whole thing Carol Dweck talks about of the growth versus a fixed mindset. You know, fixed mindset is I'm bad at math and I'll never be good at math, so I never take math classes. And the growth mindset is no matter what it is you are not good or bad at it, if you persevere at it, you will probably become world class. And purpose basically is the ultimate taskmaster saying, come on, let's go. So the book that you mentioned at the beginning, you know, I'm not haven't spent my life writing. I've spent my time doing all this work. So I resisted this thing, but and I then got all this magical help from around the planet, from having Brene Brown read the transcript and then decide she was going to have me talk to her agent, and then she was going to read the book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have to really work this thing out. To a whole series of people that have helped. But it was really one of the hardest things I've ever had to do because I wanted it to be as good as the experience that happens in the room. I feel like that's the case. If it wasn't for my purpose, I would not have done it. My purpose doesn't have me do the things that are fun and easy and effortless. It has me do the things that are meaningful, fulfilling, and usually will kick my butt. I tell you, I am a wholly satisfied person in a very different way.
You talk about purpose as being a source of energy, and it kind of links to what you just said. That, of course, then promotes engagement, having that energy as a leader. Could you talk a bit more about that? Because for everyone listening, especially as the HR professionals, engagement is obviously one of the biggest buzzwords that we talk about, and a big challenge for leaders and their organizations.
So if we talk about engagement, look, I think I'm working in enough different systems to know just how much chaos most organizations are in these days. And the idea of having a strategy that lasts longer than the yearly forecast is almost impossible. So how do you create engagement when you don't have any of the levers that you've had in the past? They're all falling away. I've got one organization where they're going to the agile model and getting rid of all titles. Okay, this life gets really complicated. Purpose is an interesting thing because what it will do is when you step into that place of purpose, you step into a place in which there is an enormous amount of energy. And it comes from a place that easily depleted. The worst thing that I see is when I have a leader in front of the room acting like they have energy, but they don't. Everybody knows it. You can see how much pain they're in trying to act like they have energy.
We can all see that, can't we? Right now, listening, all the listeners right now, we've all got.
Well, it's the ultimate expression of disengagement. The guy in front of the room is disengaged, telling people to be engaged.
Yeah,
and it's like, this is never going to work.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things I do a lot of work with organizations around organizational purpose, and the first thing I do is I say, time out, you're starting with the wrong thing. You got to let's get the leaders to know what their individual purpose is, and then we'll tackle the organizational purpose from the place of knowing that deep sense of who you are. And then when you connect them both up, you get sparks.
It has to be, in your opinion, it has to be connected, right?
Here's the thing. I think the opportunity now is to help people make that connection and connect those two pieces together. Okay. And so one of the things that, you know, some of the clients I work with are companies that, I get to work with fun companies, Ben & Jerry's, Lego, Hershey's. I don't know why I ended up with these. It's like, if it's got but these are organizations that have beautiful purposes.
Yeah.
But what the thing is when the individuals don't have such a clarity of purpose, they feel like there's something wrong with them. Everybody else has got it, but I don't have it. And then they feel like they should have it, but they don't want to tell anybody and then when I work with them, they go, oh my God, now I get why I couldn't go there. It's because I didn't know what was on the inside of me. If you don't know what's on the inside, how do you connect it to something bigger than you? And so for me, I think the challenge of engagement is I need to be engaged with myself to be engaged with you. And if I'm not personally engaged with myself, I can't do that. And so a lot of this work is about creating that connection so people know why are you here, and then where are we going together, and then the world's going to do crazy things, but at least I've got this solid ground that I'm standing on inside of myself in connection with this entity that I work for which no matter what the weather is out there, I'm going to be okay.
What are some practical, because I'm sure everyone is thinking about their own purpose right now after this, even just after we've touched on it. What are some practical steps when you do your workshops or your consulting, you sort of go into these companies or work with these leaders? What are some practical steps that we can take to identify, or questions perhaps we could ask to identify that?
There's 3 basic questions to think about. One is, so what are the magical moments in your childhood? And not just to write down playing with Barbies or playing with Legos, but I want you to write down the video of what was happening. Which, if it was the Maltese Falcon, when did you first see it? When did you decide you wanted it? What was it like to put it together? Did you imagine flying in it when you were building it? What was that sort of, who are you on the Maltese?
How did it make you feel at the time?
Right. Well, who are you on the Millennium Falcon?
Yeah.
Which role are you?
Yeah.
Who are you, Chris?
Probably Chewbacca. Probably. I used to love Chewbacca.
Well, but all I'm saying is that, it's getting in there and sort of stepping into that place that is the place of seeing the possibility of who each of us is. Right? And each of those, the reason why we love these movies is because each of those characters are an archetype that we connect to, and they connect to us and they speak to us. Once again, those, sitting down with somebody over a bottle of wine and telling your more challenging life stories, and sure, you'll back and forth, you'll transform your relationship with each other, but in the process you'll start to see what is the resilience that you bring to things that others don't, and what is that?
One of the things you talk about is good stress. Could you elaborate on that?
Okay, so
when someone says to me good stress, I'm like, really?
Okay, so here's the bad news. Here's the bad news. So I did all these interviews of all these people, and what many of them said is, the challenge I have with knowing my purpose is I put myself in many more stressful situations than I would have otherwise.
Yeah.
Right? Because instead of doing the everything's happy thing, they did the purpose thing, and the purpose thing was really tough, right? So then I'm like, oh no, what have I done? Okay. Well, when I looked at how they were talking about it, and I looked at the situations they were talking about, there are 2 types of stress. There is the fight or flight response, which is what you describe and what you're referring to, that we all hate, which is the one that if we have enough of it, it makes us wear down, we end up getting sick. And this is what basically creates enormous unhappiness, depression, all of those things. The other response to stress is called the challenge response. And that's when you watch the World Cup and it's the last 2 minutes and they score.
Because the stress of having to score makes them score.
Well, it's called a challenge response. It's like the way you relate to the stress, to the
makes sense.
situation is, so you have the fight or flight response when you do not think you have the resources and you think you're screwed. Okay, and basically you either want to punch it out or run away. But most of the time, it's an internal dialogue about not having the resources, not actual reality. In the challenge response, you believe you have the resources, and it's come on. I'm going to take you on. I'm just like, let's just get this thing done. And you push, you make it happen. Or if you don't, you really are working to see how far you can get before you end up stopping. What we find is that purpose helps us shift into the challenge response out of the fight. And so many of the people I talked to said they spent all this time in fight or flight, and they remember what their purpose was. And their purpose was like, really, you're going to sit there and just be an idiot? Let's just go do this thing. And then when they got into that side of it, then all of a sudden the outcomes changed, the relationship to it changed, because purpose has no interest in the fight or flight response. Okay, it's like, okay, if you want to be a victim, go over there. But we need to be reminded of the option.
It's outside of the activity you're actually doing, and if you don't have this sense of purpose, you're not willing to go through that pain or that disruption or through that change, unless you have a clear sense. That's what's going to drive you through. It helps drive you through that, and it keeps you going. And I almost feel like addicted to that in some senses. A lot of people say to me, Chris, you do so many different things. When I was growing up, I'd always jump from one sport to the next. and I'll be terrible in the beginning, but I loved being terrible. I actually love, and I love the ability to be really bad at something and go through the pain of getting really good at it. And when I achieved that result, I then lose interest and I jump off to the next one. And it's like something I do all the time, even with, the podcast was one of those things actually for me, as I had a sense of purpose I wanted to achieve. And I was willing to go through the pain of being terrible at podcasting and editing. And if you look at my first 10 episodes, guys, please don't listen to the first 10 episodes. Actually, they're terrible. But it was, there was terrible times. I had to learn how to edit. It's all of the terrible things I had to go through, but I really enjoyed it, although I was very stressed out going through it. So I think that's one of my own example of doing that. And I'm constantly doing that. And as you know, the best results and the best innovations come out of that, right?
Exactly. Once again, purpose really will push us to go to the places that makes us our best self. And it doesn't do it in the sort of, let's make it fun and light. It sort of does it because it just really doesn't care about fun and light. It cares about having the impact that it wants to have. And you can either participate and have a thrilling ride, or you can resist it.
Well, you're talking about happiness, right? Fulfillment versus happiness. Could you just find the difference between
this? Well, so it turns out that, happiness, if I give you all a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream and a beer, a Heineken beer, for the most part, most everybody on the call will have one of those at least that will generate in the moment a sense of potential happiness relative to feeling like, okay, this is great. But then there's what comes after you've eaten the pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge with happiness is it's not sustainable long-term. It never has been. People think that historically, a lot of people will say, well, if I have a purpose, then I will be happy. So you're the perfect example. The research shows that having kids guarantees that you will be less happy as a couple.
Well, definitely had a lot of arguments since the baby's come.
Exactly. And apparently having 2 kids, it's a lot worse. And this is research. It's like.
I'm not surprised. I don't think people are.
But at the same time, everybody who has had a child, nobody says, well, okay, so I think I want to take it back.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's such a sense of meaning that you get from being a parent, and such a learning and the discovery about who you are that transcends the lack of happiness, okay, or the worrying that goes on, or any of those other things. And so in some sense, that's the underlying thing about purpose, is that purpose is going to have you go for what is the deeper fulfillment and satisfaction, as opposed to the momentary happiness. And in most cases, most of the people I know will put the things that would make them happy to a side, because that which their purpose is calling them to do something different. And my most recent version of that was in the process of the book that just came out. The 2 years I was writing the book, no free weekends, no free vacations, zero. It was all book. You could argue it was that was challenging and tough. But at the same time, the deep satisfaction that I have of having taken my life work and finally gotten it into print is something that is so powerful relative to why I'm on the planet. And so, okay, we make these trade-offs. I just want to remind everybody that purpose isn't something that we get. Purpose is something that we reconnect to. And that for each of you, that your purpose has always been leading through you. And the opportunity is to deepen your relationship to what that purpose is. And the more you own it, then the more it will teach you what is it that you need to learn in the journey of leading from purpose. And that's really what the journey looks like. In some ways, it's leading us so that we can lead others. And we have to be willing to let it in for it to do that. And I think that the world is in a place where that's probably the only thing that we can trust. So I look forward to helping everyone do that.
Amazing.
And the book is designed to help you do some of that work. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So on that point then, for our listeners that want to reach out to you, connect with you directly, and also grab a copy of the book, what's the best place for us to do that?
Basically, you can go to the website, www.coreleader.com, And you can send me an email at nickcraig@coreleader.com. And I'll be happy to chat. So,
and I'm sure the book's available everywhere, right? Amazon and other.
It is available all over the planet.
All over the planet. Fantastic. Well, guys, for everyone listening, make sure you grab a copy. I'll link it in the description for everyone to grab a copy of the book, and also the details that you just mentioned as well. And definitely take Nick up on his offer. And you obviously you do in-house workshops, right? Are these full-day workshops? Are they 1 day, 2 days? Just to give us some perspective of how they work typically.
Yeah, we most of our programs are on the average around 2 days. Some less depending upon what we're doing.
And in group sizes, do you have a limit, or what do you typically work with?
We run programs regularly for everything from an intact team of 8 to 100 people.
Wow.
In a room. We have one client where we're rolling it out to all 40,000 employees. We sort of go the whole scale from the top to the bottom to the middle and all in between. It's a slightly different experience, but the outcome is still the same. And that's the important part. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, Nick, thank you for taking the time out to join us. You've definitely provided some really thoughtful insights and actionable advice. So I know our listeners, I think everyone's going to walk away tonight on go home or wherever you are when you're listening to this right now, saying, what is my purpose?
Exactly.
It's been I'm really excited to have you on the show because it's something we haven't covered before. And I think it's so important. So important. And as I said, it only hit me recently becoming a dad, and it's something that's been on my mind. So it's perfect timing as well. So you've definitely helped me out. So I appreciate that. Head over to hrdealers.com. You'll find the show notes from the episode as always, the link to Nick's website, the email, the book, everything will be linked in the resources for you guys to make it easier. Apart from that, Nick, thank you for taking the time out to join us. And I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry I took so long, by the way.
No, it's like, once again, I think what happened was you and I were sort of in a